So here's a question for you. Whenever you hear the word cinema, what comes to mind? Now hold on to that thought because we'll be addressing that a little later in this video. So the FX3 was released on February 23rd, 2021. Now it was surprising to everyone because we really didn't expect the camera to come because they had just released the A7S III. Now I think unarguably, many people would say that the A7S III is an incredibly powerful camera. Now here's where things get difficult. The FX3 is technically, literally the exact same camera as the A7S III. Because Sony decided to put this camera in their cinema lineup, it kind of makes it difficult to answer the question of this being the most powerful camera there is out there. Now, whenever you're talking about a mirrorless camera, of course the A7S III is incredibly powerful because it does a lot more than many cameras in this category. So if you look up the word cinema, the definition that you will find with it is a theater where movies are shown publicly. So if you think about that in mind and you think about the FX3 compared to cameras that literally shoot movies like the one over here, it makes it very difficult because I doubt that you will see really any movies in a public theater that has been shot on the FX3. After using the FX3, I found so many things that I absolutely adore and love about this camera. But with that, I've also found things that I don't technically like as I'm out shooting in the field. Now the camera that I was using before this camera is actually a camera that's technically more closer to a cinema camera than this one is, and that's the Blackmagic 6K. So as I've been shooting with this camera for the last few months, the first thing that I have really loved is the file size. Now when filming on cinema cameras, storage can be very expensive, but also very hard to manage as the file size are humongous. Filming with the FX3, I haven't reached file sizes above 40 gigabytes yet, which is kind of crazy because before I was getting file sizes of over 100 gigabytes whenever filming longer videos like this today. Editing could not have been any easier with the 422 4K 10-bit footage that you get with the FX3. I love to shoot everything in S-Log3 so that I can go back in, add all my colors that I want to add in or subtract colors that I do not want. And I find it very easy to do that within DaVinci Resolve 17. Now, like I said before, the FX3 is literally the A7S III internals inside a new body. Now, because of that, this camera gets incredible low light capabilities. So for you guys who don't know, the S in the A7S III lineup literally means sensitivity, which means it's sensitive to low light. Whenever you're shooting in low light, if you go up to 12,800, the image gets a lot cleaner and you're able to shoot in very low light conditions without any noise whenever you use the dual gain supported on this camera. Now, if you're into slow motion, this camera also has you covered as it can do 4K 120 frames, but it can also do 1080 at 240 frames per second, which I've actually found very useful whenever I'm shooting at weddings and party events. So partnering slow motion with those low light capabilities, you're able to get some incredible footage whenever shooting in low light conditions or really anywhere. Obviously, this has a lot to do with the lens that you're shooting with as well, because if you're not able to get a low enough aperture, then you're still gonna have to crank up your ISO to above 12,800, which will again make it more noisy. Now, speaking of lens, the other thing that you have to keep in mind whenever switching to Sony bodies is the lenses and all the accessories that go around the camera. Now again, for me, I was switching from the Blackmagic 6K, and so I found it incredibly alarming once I got the FX3 body and had to purchase a lens. In fact, it was so expensive for me that I could not purchase the G Master lens that I wanted, and I bought a $100 lens off Facebook Marketplace, which is still what I'm recording this video with today. Now, as I said, it's not only the lens that you have to think about, you also have to think about the storage. Because you have all these different codecs that you can shoot with the FX3, you can only access a few of them with certain types of memory cards. And if you plan to purchase the Sony memory cards, those cards cost $100 for just 64 gigabytes. Now, in comparison, you can buy a 128 gigabyte card for that same price. So these are things that I definitely wish I knew before I bought this camera. Now, if you guys are interested in supporting this channel, please check out the link below in the description to purchase merch like the one that I have on today. Now, moving forward, let's talk about the flexibility that you get on this cinema camera. So you have all of these different buttons laid out around the camera, which you can customize to your liking. And for me, I've done exactly that and remapped these buttons to the best way that I like to shoot. And if you guys are interested, you can actually download the files that I use on my camera so you can upload them to your camera and start using them. Now, moving back to customization, there's really not too much that you can't customize on this camera, which I really do love about that. In comparison, this is something that's really not offered on Canon cameras or even Blackmagic cameras. And taking it a step further, you also have these memory recall settings, which you can set up for different sets that you may have, or even different settings that you may use with different clients. Now, another thing that I do love about this cinema camera, and is really the reason why I purchased it, is because of how good the autofocus is on this camera. The autofocus on this camera is so fast and reliable, and you can really customize it to be whatever you want it to be. Now, what I mean by that is you can customize the speed that it takes to rack focus to another item. You can even customize the way that it tracks your eye, which eye you want it to track. And you can even turn on and off whether you're tracking a human's eye or an animal's eye. Now, unfortunately, the autofocus is not this good whenever you partner different brands of lenses with this camera, which is the reason why I chose to stick to native glass on this camera. Now, speaking on that note of autofocus, this is something that you don't want to have on a cinematic camera in most cases. Whenever using a cinematic camera, you have a group of individuals who control different settings on the camera. So you may have the person who's running the camera, but then you will also have another person who is there to only work on pulling focus to make sure that you're focusing and highlighting exactly what you want to highlight on the screen. Now, I think that Sony is so confident in their autofocus that they think that majority of the time, this camera can focus on what you want it to focus on without any issues. Now, while their technology is incredible and still evolving, I'm not sure that most cinematic filmmakers would like to have an autofocus feature while they're filming on set. Now, speaking on that topic, another thing that cinematic cameras typically don't do is take photographs. Now, the FX3 does take above average photos, but for me personally, I would like to have more megapixels because I like to zoom in and crop my photos to reuse them later in post. Now, this is something that I do daily because I don't have time to go take photographs as much, and I will typically crop an old photo and repost it. Now, with this camera and the photos that this offers, I'm not able to do that because when I zoom in, I lose quite a bit of quality and the image isn't as sharp. So the question that you guys may have is, who is this camera for and should you buy it? So first, I want to address the issue of this being a cinema camera. There's pretty much only one category of someone who shoots cinematic films that I would recommend this camera to, and that person would be someone who shoots documentaries. The reason for that is a lot of times you find budget filmmakers who are shooting these documentaries and they're the only person shooting, so having something like autofocus and all the features that come with this camera would be more than helpful for those guys. But for everyone else who fits in the cinema group, this camera is not for them because this really isn't a cinema camera in my opinion. That being said, I think that this camera really is for professional content creators like YouTubers, podcasters, or even independent video makers who are creating small commercials for companies and etc. If you guys are interested in more Sony FX3 videos, please consider checking out these videos on the screen. Until then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.